Breadboard ends are really popular nowadays. You might not know what they are, and maybe you do. Maybe you didn't even know they were called breadboard ends. If you've been doing them, it's a good chance you've been doing them wrong. If you're getting any splitting and cracking in your tables, if you're getting any weird expansion and contraction, follow along. There's a specific way that these are supposed to be built, and I want to teach you how to do that in this video. Let's get to work.
Breadboards. They're a pain in the butt, but if you're gonna do them, might as well do them right. Oftentimes when you do breadboards and you don't do it right, you can cause all kinds of splitting and cracking inside of your table. So let's learn to do it right. First thing what I do is I find the center of my table, and then I usually make about 5 marks on each end of the table. 5 inches from the left and the right. Depending on the width of the table, here I'm doing 5 inches, then I'll do 12, and then right in the center. What these marks are for is for my domino, this machine that you see right now. It's an awesome machine that makes mortise and tenons inside of your piece of furniture. So what it's doing is hollowing out an area inside of the table that will allow for me to put a tenon, which is that stick of wood that you see there, those little domino looking things. Well, yeah, they're really good for this because what they're going to do is hold this breadboard onto the end. And so now what you want to do is make sure you make the same marks, the same width on the board that you did on the table. And you're going to proceed with putting the domino holes inside of the breadboard itself also. Now, we're going to do this a little bit different. On the table itself, what we did is there are different notches on the wiggle room, I guess you could say, on the domino machine. The wiggle room is how tight that tenon, that domino, is going to sit inside of the table. So I made them all tight on the table itself, and on the breadboard I only make the center hole tight. So you can see here on the middle there is a tight hole, and the ones we're making now are on the second notch, which makes it a little bit looser. The reason why we want it loose is so that if the table expands and contracts at all, the domino has room to move. So I'm going to glue them into the table itself, and I will not be gluing these into the breadboard. The reason why this breadboard is not going to expand with the table is because the grain is going across the grain of the table. So you have the width, the side grain going up against the end grain. I'm marking out now where I'm going to be drilling a hole to put my dowels in. My dowels will be used to pry the breadboard up against the table itself. There'll be no glue added here, so this is going to be all friction and tension that's holding this breadboard on. We want to make sure that we mark exactly center of this domino, because when we go back we're going to be drilling again through the breadboard, and we want to make sure that it's not any further away than the hole in our breadboard, so that it actually applies the right amount of tension to the table. I'm making a 3/8 hole in these dominoes because my dowels are 3/8, so I want to make sure they fit nice and snug. Now, with the 4 dominoes on the left and the right, not the center domino, I'm going to elongate them. So I want to hold my drill as straight as possible and go back and forth, just to give it that space to wiggle with the expansion and contraction. Now I'm just going to apply a little bit of glue to the center of this breadboard. You can see maybe about 8 to 10 inches worth of glue, and fill that center domino hole that is the only tight one with glue itself. So this breadboard is only glued to the table in the center. The rest of the breadboard is going to be held on by the tension of the dowels. So I'm just going to pound this bad boy on there. It's nice and snug. The domino holes fit well. You see that I got them nicely measured, nicely aligned, and make sure that this thing is nice in the center. Now that you have the edges that are a little bit elongated, it can move a little bit left and right, so tap it over, make sure it's in the center. Now I'm going to clamp these breadboards to the table itself because I don't want any gaps on the ends where I'm going to be putting my dowels in. So that's going to be making sure that when I apply the dowel, it's going to hold it actually tight. Now we flipped over the table because I want to make sure that my dowels are only seen on the bottom. I'm not going to be drilling all the way through the table. Just enough through the meat of the bottom of the table, through the domino, and a little bit into the top of the table, just to give it enough tension to pry it towards the table. And I'm going to be making sure that my lines are exactly where they were in the dominoes themselves. So I actually drill through my hole, not in a new place through the domino. I like to add a little bit of tape to my drill bit. I usually use a Forstner bit just to have a clean hole. And I measure the depth of that just to make sure I don't pop through the top and have my dowel coming out the top of the table. So now we just drill away right on our mark. The reason why I really like Forstner bits is it has a nice fine tip to make sure I get exactly on my line. So we're just gonna drill away, make sure we get the right depth, make sure our dowel is gonna stick in deep enough to hold this thing to the table, and we will be good to go with the dowels. Give it a nice blow, get all that dust out of there, and then we'll be going over to the bandsaw and chopping up these dowels. I usually make them a little bit long just to make sure that I can pound them in there, get them nice and snug, and then I'll be chopping them down flush a little bit later. So now I'm going to go over, I'm going to add just a dab of glue to hold this dowel in. It's not going to be restricting from any expansion and contraction. It's just going to make sure that that dowel stays snug. Now we just take my rubber hammer, I pound it in as far as it'll let me go, and we'll be good to go. You want to make sure you leave your clamps on during this process because the glue that's in the domino that's inside the table is not yet cured. So if you remove the clamps, the dowel itself is not going to be holding it to the table. You want to make sure that that glue that's inside the table is cured, and then the dowel will be able to use that force of the glue to pry the breadboard to the table. Now we just take a damp rag, wipe off any excess, grab my Japanese pull saw. Really like this saw because it gives you a really flush, clean cut. It's easy to sand, make it look nice and clean. One little tip I'd like to add is that I usually use my 1/8 inch roundover bit with my router on the edges and corners of the breadboard, just in case there's any expansion and contraction later on. There's no sharp edges. And there you have it. Breadboard ends on this table. I also have company boards here as an extension, but that's for another video.
So, have you been doing it right? If not, hopefully this video has been helpful. And if you never tried it before, hopefully you have the confidence now to try, because in the popular demand of breadboard ends and farmhouse tables, this is a good skill to have. See you guys in the next video. Please leave a like down below, leave a comment on what you want to see in the next video, and see you next time.